It's good to see everybody here this evening. If you are visiting with us, I'm not the regular preacher, and if you're able to be back with us, I encourage you to do so when Tyler's preaching. He's the paid person that's a professional that knows what he's doing up here. You know, I'm a hack. And I actually would say I'm probably like fourth string, because if you think about it, we have a retired preacher that I'd say is B string, and then we have our elders that are all great preachers. I'd say they're C string. Then we have teenagers that are amazing preachers. They're C, and so I'm somewhere after that. So I just want to lower that bar. So John was very nice with the things he said, and I don't know about very good, but I'm trying to be an okay preacher. So tonight, really appreciate you being here if you are visiting with us. If not, I appreciate you being here as well. I'm going to talk a little bit, and one of the things I really appreciate about being here is kind of that connection to family. And so like I've known John my whole life, and the Freilings my whole life, the Wards my whole life, and several other families out there, the Howlers, the Carters. I've just known so many people here, and part of it is, you know, their connection to my parents, who my dad passed away in 2019, my mom passed away in 2009, and they were just such critical parts of my life, and I am nothing without them and their example. And so to have that connection is really special, and as time goes on, you know, people pass away that knew my parents, and it's kind of sad to see that happen, because then fewer and fewer people have that history or connection to what makes you you, right? And so it's very nice, and I very much appreciate this church family, and then the ones that I've got to know that my parents didn't know. Hopefully I show at least a little bit. I can't show all of it because my mom was just so lovely. I hope I show a little bit of the love that she had for others. She truly adored everyone. And so hopefully I can bestow that a little bit. But tonight I wanted to start off, and if you want to turn to Genesis chapter 38, we're going to turn there in a minute. But I wanted to start off talking a little bit about my dad. And so I really enjoyed a lot of time with my dad. I have a lot of great fond memories, and a lot of times being in the car with him and either going on trips, or maybe he was taking me to school or picking me up from school. I don't know what that whistling noise is, but I don't think that's me. But one of the things we would do is listen to the radio. And so on the radios, news, and there were radio personalities, there were talk shows and things like that, but there was one particular radio commentator that really stood out and that I always appreciated, and that was Paul Harvey. So Paul Harvey was a commentator, and he had a little show. There was one in the morning and one in the afternoon. I can't remember which one was which, but one of them was the rest of the story. And Paul Harvey had a great voice, and he had an amazing way of telling stories. And I would say he was kind of a Midwestern Americana, kind of tell you something that you really didn't know. Sometimes it was about somebody famous that maybe you didn't know the history of. Sometimes it was about a very average person that may have had an impactful existence that you didn't realize. And you'd hear these stories, and I can't remember them all, but a few of them really stuck, and they stuck with me for quite a while. He was on, Mondays through Fridays. So, it was either drive into work or drive home, and I can't remember which. I felt like it was the drive home was the rest of the story, but you can correct me later if I'm wrong. But I'm going to tell you about one of the ones that was most memorable to me. And so I'm going to go through this. So full disclosure, I do not have the eloquent voice that Paul Harvey did. I don't have the way to say the words like he did, but I'm going to say it in Danielese. That's how Daniel speaks, Danielese. And I'm going to say it the way I say it, but still try to tell the story and give you a rest of the story. It was a cold winter night when 12-year-old Randy was on the floor suffering from a seizure from what was hopefully a minor one. But as his Mama Ruth looked on at him, this one appeared to be more life-threatening than she had hoped. Mama Ruth looked outside and a blizzard was rolling in. This was winter in Michigan, and Randy kept flailing on the floor. In an act of desperation, Mama Ruth had heard of using laundry bluing as a seizure remedy. So she used a thimble, filled it with the substance, attempted to pour it into Randy's mouth, but with no result. Randy still continued to seize on the floor. She then turned to Randy's friend, 8-year-old James. See, Randy and James had been raised almost like brothers, but in fact, they were just best friends. she turned to James. She told him, James, this is very important. You need to go, put your snow boots on, run to Mr. Fortelka's store, and tell him to call the doctor and send him to our house. Do you understand? And James nodded. He understood. So James did just as he was told. He put on his snow boots, ran to Mr. Fortelka's snow in waist-deep snow, across fields, across farm fields, praying that his friend Randy would be okay. James knew that his success might be the only thing that saved his best friend's life. Mr. Fortelka's store was over a mile away, but James got to the store and tried to tell Mr. Fortelka that Randy was sick and needed a doctor. He tried, but all that would come out of his mouth was utterances and strange sounds. You see, James was a stutterer. He had suffered with stuttering his entire life. Ever since his family had moved to Michigan, he struggled with stuttering. In fact, this impediment had caused James to withdraw and recluse because of this embarrassment. For years, teachers accommodated his challenges, and everyone knew of his struggles. But on that night, in Mr. Fortelka's store, inside James was brewing an internal battle to get the words out to ask for help for Randy. Now, at this point, you're usually really wanting to know, who are these people? And usually I think, and I may be wrong, but I think there was a commercial. And I think Paul Harvey would try to sell some razors or something, and because you wanted to wait, because you want to hear the rest of the story, because the rest of it was the rest of the story. And I think I remember sitting in our driveway. We already did whatever distance we were traveling. I'm either at work or with Dad traveling home, and you can't leave the car, not knowing who these people are, at least one of them. Who are these people? What happens? Does Randy live or die? You're on the edge of your seat. It's like a cliffhanger of cliffhangers. You got to know, right? So should I just leave, or do y'all want to? Oh, y'all want to know? Okay. That's why Paul Harvey was so good at what he does. Then, as if a dam of words was broken, finally came out of James' mouth what seemed like an eternity. He said, Randy is sick. Call the doctor. They called the doctor. The doctor was able to get to the house, and Randy's life was saved. James continued to struggle with speech. And in fact, in adulthood, if he wasn't careful with his utterances, he still struggled. But although you would never imagine of this individual, for the person who is known at this time for struggling with communication, today is now known for his voice. And he earned his living using his voice. For the once tongue-tied man as a person with a magnificent voice. In fact, he's known for reciting everything from Shakespeare to the voice of Darth Vader, to the voice of Mufasa in the original Lion King, and you would know this person as James Earl Jones. And now you know the rest of the story. Good day. So that's the best I can do for Paul Harvey. But what made so James Earl Jones, I guess that's why it stuck with me, because it was Darth Vader. So huge Star Wars fan. I can't help but remember, the one Paul Harvey about a Star Wars character. But James Earl Jones, he had this booming voice and always so eloquent with his speech. And you knew when he was on screen because of his presence and his voice. But to think that was someone that struggled with that. And I think that's what made the rest of the story so interesting. Because there was either a surprise element or there was something about them that think, this person could never get to that point. In other instances, when they tell us about people, again, there were people that we do not know, but they had some significance, right? And there was something that was interesting about what they did. And that rest of the story was what made you have to hang on. And you got to find out what the rest of the story is. But if you think about it, in the Bible, most of the stories we love and most of the characters that we learn about are that same format. They have a background that you think, they'll never amount to anything. Or, how could anybody overcome that struggle or that challenge? And that's their rest of the story. So we're going to look at a couple of those, but then I'll have a question at the end after doing so. So the first one is back in Genesis, chapter 37. I think I said Genesis 38. Genesis 37. One of those that really stands out to me that's a remarkable I would say, rest of the story is Joseph. His brothers were so jealous of him. They hated him so much they were going to kill him. That was their plan. We're going to kill Joseph. One of their brothers talked him out of it, so they threw him in a pit. And then they decide, well, rather than just waste his life, why don't we profit off of him? I mean, I've been in arguments with my brothers, and I've been mistreated by my brothers, but they never sold me into slavery. They sold him into slavery because they hated him so much. That's a bad start to life right there. When your brothers and your family members sell you into slavery. Then he ends up in Egypt, and he's sold as a slave to a gentleman named Potiphar. Potiphar sees that Joseph is a God-fearing man, and he sees that the things he does, and again, that was Genesis 37, we're now over to Genesis 39, he's successful with what he does. And so Potiphar puts him in charge, and basically he's over his house. Pretty good. Joseph's in a good spot. Unfortunately, Potiphar had a terrible person as a wife, and she tricks him, and Joseph was just so amazing. She tries to get him to lie with her, but in Genesis 39, verse 8, he refused, and he said to his master's wife, "Behold, with me here, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house, as he put all that he owns in my charge. There was no one greater in the house than I, and he has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How could I do this great evil and sin against God?" See, Joseph was such a great person, he put an equivalence of any sin with being against God. Even though it would directly affect Potiphar, he directly saw that and took it to heart as a sin against God, and he did not do it. Great job, Joseph. But she wasn't done. She's a terrible person. She tricks him and eventually steals his robe from him, and he runs off, and she tells her husband that he tried to attack me, and her husband throws him in prison. So sold into slavery, now in prison. It's terrible. What a terrible situation. And we're not even to the rest of the story part. So eventually, he's there with some prisoners, and he tells them of their dreams, right? Cupbearer and the baker. And all he asks the cupbearer, just remember me when you're out. So in chapter 40, verse 23, we see that yet the cupbearer did not remember Joseph when he got out. How disheartening. And how long did he wait there in prison, Joseph? 2 years. 2 years. And again, serving God from all we can tell, doing what's right, but yet still suffering. And then he eventually interprets some dreams for Pharaoh, gets out of prison, and then he becomes in charge of a lot of things. And then to the rest of the story, back to the family that sold him into slavery. And again, I highly recommend, read all of this, read all the details. I'm going over it in a very fast fashion. A lot of amazing details in here. But eventually, his family, there's a famine in the land, and his family come and they need help. They don't recognize Joseph. And so Joseph kind of messes with them a little bit, but then in chapter 45, he can't take it any longer. Joseph, chapter 45, we'll read the first five verses. Then Joseph could not control himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried, "Have everyone go out from me." So there was no man with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. He wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. And then Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come closer to me." And they came closer, and he said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. Now do not be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life." I mean, what an amazing perspective Joseph had, that he knew. I think I would have at least a little bit of a grudge. You sold me into slavery, but Joseph knew that this was part of God's plan. And it was back to that dream he had with his brothers bowing down to him. And he had such a great perspective. And then the last part of the rest of the story is a few chapters go on. In chapter 46, verses 29 through 30, Joseph and his dad, 29 through 30. Joseph prepared his chariot and went to Goshen to meet his father Israel. As soon as he appeared before him, he fell on his neck and wept on his neck a long time. Then Israel said to Joseph, whom he thought was dead, now let me die, since I have seen your face, that you are still alive. That's a pretty good rest of the story. And there's a lot more that happens after that. But we'll stop there with Joseph. But it kind of has that same feel to it, right? There's drama, there's challenges, and then there's God's person overcomes those challenges. Pretty amazing. Another one with a little bit different twist that I thought of, and there were a bunch that came to mind. I mean, David, Moses, you do all those. But one that I thought of was Joshua chapter 2. Joshua chapter 2, we're introduced to a person that helps the spies in Jericho. Rahab, not the tent maker, not the dressmaker, Rahab the harlot. And everybody of age who knows what a harlot is, Rahab the harlot is the one that becomes a hero in this story. And she allows the spies to stay in her house. She hides them. And then she also gives a signal for when they're coming to town. But then she asked in Joshua chapter 2, and I believe it was about verse 12. Now therefore, please swear to me by the Lord, since I have dealt kindly with you, that you also will deal kindly with me and my father's household, and give me a pledge of truth, and spare my father and my mother and my brothers and my sisters with all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death. And so it happened. There was a couple other promises, but she did her part, and they honored that. And if you go forward to Joshua chapter 6, when all is done in this encounter, Joshua chapter 6, verses 25 through 26, basically the city's burned down. They shredded everything. But, verse 25, however, Rahab, not the dressmaker, not the tent maker, not the color of purple maker, the harlot and her father's household and all she had, Joshua spared. And she lived in the midst of the city, in the midst of Israel to this day, for she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. That's a pretty good stopping place right there. I mean, this person, a harlot, did so much to help God's people. But for her, there's a rest of the story. So turn with me to Hebrews chapter 11, Rahab, the harlot. Hebrews chapter 11, the book of faith. You can go through chapter 11 and see all the great names of the Old Testament. Abraham, Noah, Moses, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. So many great names in there. And who's in verse 31? By faith, Rahab, not the tent maker, not the dressmaker, the harlot. I mean, talk about starting off in one station in life, and now in Hebrews, in the chapter of faith, she is one of the ones mentioned. By faith, Rahab, the harlot, did not perish along with those who were disobedient after she had welcomed the spies in peace. Pretty incredible. That could be it too. But we're not done. Turn a book over to James. James chapter 2, verse 25, talking about faith and works. Rahab had faith. What about her works? She's here too in the same way. James chapter 2, verse 25. We'll go ahead and go to 24. You see that a man is justified by works and not by faith alone. In the same way, was not Rahab the harlot also justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out by another way? Incredible. She was one of the examples of faith, one of the examples of works. And then to top it all off, Matthew chapter 1, in the lineage of Jesus, not the tent maker, not the color of purple maker, pretty incredible. That's a good rest of the story. Matthew chapter 1, verse 5, if you wanted to turn there. Pretty incredible rest of the stories found in the Bible. But I would like to ask, our question for tonight is, what is our rest of the story? In other words, we are living a life and we're given choices to make. And our rest of the story can start now. It could have started for you some other time ago. But what are you going to make of it? God's already chosen us. He selected everyone. He wants everybody to go to heaven. We're already chosen. He sacrificed everything he can. He gave his only begotten Son so that all of us can have a hope to be with in heaven one day. He loves us. He wants what's best for us. He's chosen us, but are we going to choose him? And we have many choices in this life. I've had some friends that had made some really bad choices. They were Christian friends, and they had this thought. They said, well, if God didn't want me to commit that sin, he would have stopped me. It doesn't work that way. We have free will. We have the ability to make bad decisions. On the plus side, we have the ability to make really good decisions too. But we have to choose. God wants us to choose him. And sometimes those choices, they seem small or maybe insignificant. But later on in life, we look back and we're like, yeah, I should have chosen another way. Whether it's the profession you choose, the friends you hang out with, the people you associate with, the way you spend your time, what motivates you, what makes you work harder or do better. Is it greed, or is it truly love of others and just trying to serve God and do what's right? Those affect the decisions we make and the things that we choose to do. But if you really compare and look at light and darkness, there are some vast differences in the results of the two. And I think every time I preach, I end up going here, but I just can't get it out of my head. But in Galatians chapter 5, we look at the works of the flesh and the spirit. And you can contrast the light and darkness, but really, let's look at these words and look at these things. And it's difficult for me when we're looking at the deeds of the flesh to really understand that, especially for my youth, because I grew up in a house that was full of the fruit of the Spirit. My parents were not perfect. None of us were perfect, but there was always love, and there was always a genuine care and a genuine concern for other people. As I've gotten older and I've been involved in things in the world, that is very rare in the world. There is so much selfishness and greed and just really hatred towards other people, or they hate themselves so much that they take it out on others. But let's look at some of these words. And if you're trying to decide which way do I go in this life, look at these words and really determine for yourself, which of these do I want around me? Which of these do I want to associate with? Let's start with the positive, the fruits of the Spirit. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law. There is no law. I mean, what a beautiful existence. If you're surrounded by love and joy and peace and patience, how wonderful that is. And again, it's never perfect. We're all human, so don't go home to your parents and complain, you're not patient enough, Dad. I mean, we get frustrated at times. Teenagers are interesting, and they can try our patience. But behind that, thank you, Eddie, behind that is always love. We always love and try to lead with love. But truly having the basis in scriptures of goodness and kindness, and we're not just doing it just to do it, but we want to serve God and do what he wants us to do. That's the motivation, and that's where we're driven. Let's go up to the deeds of the flesh. Let's see if we want to hang out in this area. Immorality, impurity, sensuality. It's hard to kind of wrap around what all that means, but you'll kind of see better definitions in verse 20, I think. Idolatry, so people are loving something more than others, so that's bad. Sorcery, I don't know, that's different. but enmities, strife, jealousy, outbursts of anger. If you've ever spent time, if you grew up in a Christian family and you ever went to a friend's house whose parents were not Christians and maybe have no basis in religion, you see strife, enmities, jealousy, outbursts of anger, disputes, dissensions, enviness, unfortunately in some cases drunkenness. I mean, just look at these differences. These are vast differences in choices that you make in your life and how you want to live. If you ever want to see some examples of this, I don't know what the cop show is now. It used to be Cops, and then it was On Patrol or something like that. Just watch 10 minutes of that show, what the police officers in cities across America have to deal with. I mean, it is sad. It's a sad state of affairs. I heard a report, I think it was this last week, and I think this is right. I think this is what they said, that 30 to 40% of Americans are not affiliated religiously at all. There's no basis. And I see that as good and bad. So that's a blank sheet of paper that maybe we can work with and maybe help teach them a better way than this world. But on the other side, there's no basis. You're starting at ground zero. And so it's starting with very basic things like why God is and what it means to us and who Jesus is. But it's a big opportunity for us. But there's a lot of kids being raised with absolutely no guidance. They don't have love. They don't have patience. They don't have someone looking out for them for their better good. And I guess the only word is there's just so much selfishness. But if you're going to try to decide, okay, which one of these lives do I want, just go home, take out a piece of paper and write down these words. On one side, the world, on one side, Jesus, and compare that. Where do you want to live your existence? And there should be no hard decision there. What becomes hard is the devil does a good job of packaging it and making it look really fun to be a partier. Like all those beer commercials and liquor commercials. I mean, those are some good-looking people out there getting lit. But you don't see what happens 2 hours later when they're drunk and they crash into somebody and maybe kill somebody and go to jail. They don't show that part. They don't show what happens to their family when their kids can't even have a conversation with them because they're loaded. They don't show that. The devil doesn't package it that way. That wouldn't be nice and pretty. He wants to show you just what he thinks is going to entice people, and it works. They wouldn't be paying $1 million for a spot if it wasn't selling it. So it's working, so what are you going to do? What are your choices going to be? And Paul Harvey, he was the author of the rest of the story. Very good at it. He wrote the stories, and he probably had a team. He probably got so big that they had lots of people writing it, but we can call him the author of those things. As we look through some of those Bible stories that we read about, that was written by the prophets through God's hand. God was the author of that. And so who's the author that we're trying to live up to? I want to thank John for reading the verse at the start, 2 verses at the start that I asked him to. Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us also lay aside every encumbrance and sin which so easily entangles us. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him who has endured such hostility by sinners against himself, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Jesus is the author of our salvation. And that's the opportunity we have. And so tonight, I don't know everyone's situation here. There may be someone here that says, I got to start my rest of the story right now. And we got water. You can be baptized. There may be some that maybe started the rest of the story and maybe they floundered and they need some help and they need prayers. Now's a great time for that. There may be some that have sins of a personal nature. Take care of that today. Make a change. Make a change. Serve God first. Let Jesus be your author of your salvation. If there's anyone that needs to come forward for any reason, please do so as we stand and sing.